The echo of a prison door slamming shut reverberated through the desolate hallway. In the silence that followed, the old man sat in the cold, grey chair, his hands shaking, eyes sunken from the years spent behind bars. There was no mercy left in the world for him. The weight of his actions had long since condemned him. But now, as he faced the final moments of his life, there was one last hope, a last wish that burned brighter than the anger and regret that had consumed him. He whispered her name softly, Bella. It had been over 5 years since he'd seen her, his loyal companion, his only friend. The dog that had waited at the door every day. The dog that had loved him unconditionally, even when the rest of the world turned its back. She wasn't just a dog. She was his anchor in a world that had long forgotten him. But now, on the eve of his execution, he was told that he could see her one last time. The guards didn't understand. They couldn't comprehend the bond between a man and his dog. But it didn't matter. For him, this moment was everything. They said it was his final wish. But when the doors creaked open and Bella stepped into the dim, sterile room, what happened next would change everything. The man sat in his cell, the ticking of the clock louder than ever. His final hours were slipping away, each second burning a hole in his soul. His only hope, the thing he clung to in those moments of desperation, was the promise he had made to Bella long ago. The guards had given him an hour. Just 1 hour to see her, to touch her, to say goodbye. He remembered the first time he'd seen her, a scruffy little pup abandoned on the side of the road, eyes wide and pleading. She had been alone in the world just like him. He hadn't known then that the two of them would save each other, that their bond would become something so much more than either could have expected. The waiting felt like eternity. His cell was empty but for the bare concrete walls and the single, flickering light above. He could smell the dampness in the air, the faint odor of stale bread and old metal. There was nothing in this place that could soothe him, but he wasn't alone anymore, not really. Bella's memory was in every corner of his mind, every whisper of wind that blew through the cracked window. When they finally brought her in, his heart stopped. She was older now, her once shiny coat dull and thin, her eyes softer, wiser, as though she had carried the weight of the years with him. She moved slowly, as if unsure of the place, her tail stiff at her side. The room was heavy with the scent of antiseptic, but when she approached, all he could smell was her. The familiar, comforting scent of home. He reached out for her, his hands trembling. His fingers brushed the top of her head, and for a moment he was overwhelmed. This was it. His last wish had come true, but as he looked into her eyes, something shifted in the air. He could see it in her expression, the uncertainty, the fear. Bella wasn't the same dog he remembered. She wasn't just here to say goodbye. There was something else. Something that changed everything. The room felt too small, the walls closing in around them. The only sound was the soft scratching of Bella's paws on the floor and the distant hum of machinery that seemed so far away from the reality of this moment. The man's heart ached as he gazed at her, his fingers still tangled in her fur. It was as though the universe had stopped for just this moment. She sat in front of him, looking at him with those eyes that seemed to speak the language of the soul. There was something raw in her gaze, something that he couldn't place. He had never been a man of many words, but now, in this fleeting time, words felt like the most useless thing in the world. What could he say to her? "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice rough, worn from years of silence. He had been sorry 1,000 times over, but it never felt like enough. For the first time in his life, he allowed himself to feel the weight of all the pain he had caused. The wrongs that could never be undone, the lives he had shattered. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the pain of losing her. Bella's ears twitched, and she took a tentative step forward, her body trembling. She nudged his hand with her nose, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. The connection between them, the bond they shared, had never been about words. It had always been about understanding, about feeling. And in that moment, he understood. Her presence, so quiet, so gentle, was the balm to his soul. He could feel her warmth, her heartbeat, her love, as she settled beside him, pressing her body close. He closed his eyes, feeling the world fall away. If there was one thing he could carry with him into the darkness, it was this: the pure, unconditional love of a dog who had never once turned her back on him. The sound of footsteps interrupted their brief moment of solace. The guard was back, his voice cold as he ordered Bella to be taken away. The man didn't resist, not out of obedience, but out of a quiet acceptance that the time had come. Yet as Bella was gently pulled away, the man's heart clenched painfully in his chest. "No," he said, reaching for her, his voice breaking. "Please." But the guard only glanced at him with disinterest. It was not their job to understand. Bella was not theirs to save. But she was his, and that was all that mattered. "Please," he whispered again, his voice pleading now. "She's all I have left." There was a brief silence. For a moment, he thought that maybe, just maybe, they would let her stay. But the guard turned away, indifferent, as the sound of Bella's pause faded into the distance. The man collapsed back into the chair, his chest heaving with emotion. The promise he had made to her so many years ago, that he would never leave her, felt like a lie now. He had broken it long ago, and the realization that he couldn't keep it one last time was unbearable. The door slammed shut behind him, and he was alone again. Hours passed, the ticking clock a constant reminder of the time slipping away. The man lay on his cot, eyes closed, but his mind was elsewhere, racing through the memories of the life he had once known. His regret, his shame, were constant companions, gnawing at him from within. But as the minutes turned into hours, something inside him began to shift. He couldn't just let it end like this. He couldn't let Bella be the last thing he lost. He stood up, unsteady at first, but then with more certainty. He had no power over the world outside these walls, but in here, in this moment, he had a choice. He had the choice to fight for something that mattered. His steps were slow, measured, but they carried him toward the door. He would not let them take Bella from him. Not again. Not without a fight. As he approached the guards, a surge of adrenaline coursed through him. He didn't know what he would do, but he knew that he had to try. For Bella. For the only family he had ever truly known. But when he reached the door, something unexpected happened. The door opened, and the head warden stood there, his expression unreadable. The man stopped short, his heart pounding in his chest. But instead of the cold dismissal he expected, the warden stepped aside. "We've been watching," he said quietly, his voice low and surprisingly gentle. "She's not just your dog. She's been here every day waiting for you. We'll let her in." The man's breath caught in his throat. The guards, the prison, the system, it had all felt like a cage for so long. But now, in this moment, it felt like freedom. For the first time in years, he could breathe. When Bella walked through that door, her eyes met his with the same love, the same unwavering devotion. She was back, and for the first time in his life, he knew that this was not the end. It was just the beginning. The beginning of something far more precious than freedom. It was the beginning of redemption. In that small, stark room, the old man and his dog found a peace they had long since thought impossible. And together, they walked out of the darkness. The soft rustle of leaves outside the window mingled with the distant hum of the city. The rain had finally stopped, but the clouds still lingered, casting a muted light over everything. The man, now standing outside the prison walls for the first time in what felt like forever, felt an unfamiliar warmth spread across his chest. It was as though the world had somehow softened around him, as though it understood the gravity of the moment. Bella walked beside him, her steps light and sure, as if she had never been confined to a cage, as if she had never spent days without the warmth of the man who had raised her. The bond between them had always been a silent one. No words needed, only a shared understanding. Yet now, more than ever, words felt inadequate. The journey ahead was uncertain, but they had each other, and that was enough. The man ran a hand through his graying hair, the wind tugging at the edges of his coat. He had no idea where they would go, what they would do. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel like the weight of the world was on his shoulders. He felt lighter, as though the burden of his past had been lifted, not erased, but acknowledged. He didn't need forgiveness, not from anyone but himself. Bella nuzzled her head against his leg, a gentle reminder that no matter the road ahead, they would face it together. He bent down, his fingers trembling as he stroked her soft fur. "We'll make it, Bella," he whispered, his voice rough from years of disuse. "We'll find a place where we can breathe, where we can be free." The world around them seemed to pause as the first light of dawn touched the horizon. The man, for the first time, felt like he was no longer running. He wasn't running from the mistakes of his past, nor from the things he couldn't change. No, he was simply walking forward, one step at a time, with Bella at his side. The promise he had made to her long ago had changed everything. It had saved them both. Days passed in a blur of new faces, new sounds, and unfamiliar places. The man found work at a small construction site, doing what he could to keep the bills paid, while Bella settled into their tiny apartment. The walls were bare, but there was a quiet kind of peace in their solitude. They were both adjusting, learning to navigate a world that had once felt so distant, so unreachable. There were moments of doubt, of course. The man still caught himself looking over his shoulder, expecting to see the cold, steel bars of a prison cell looming behind him. But then Bella would nudge him gently, reminding him that he was here now, that this was his life, and it was worth fighting for. He made a habit of taking long walks with her in the evening, the sun casting long shadows over the empty streets. They would stop at the park, where Bella would chase after sticks and run until her legs were tired. Watching her so full of life, so carefree, made him feel something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. It was fragile, fleeting, but it was there. Some nights, when the silence felt too heavy, when the weight of his past seemed to pull at him, he would lie awake, listening to the soft rhythm of Bella's breathing. She was his anchor, his steady, unwavering presence. In her eyes, he found forgiveness, not for the things he had done, but for the man he had once been. They had both been broken in different ways, but together they had begun to heal. It wasn't an easy journey, and it wouldn't be perfect, but it was theirs. And for the first time in years, the man realized that perhaps that was enough. It was an ordinary Tuesday when the call came. The man had just finished his shift and was heading home when the phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the quiet of the evening. He didn't recognize the number, but something in his gut told him that it wasn't good. His heart skipped a beat as he answered. "Is this John Doe?" The voice on the other end was official, cold, but there was something softer about it, almost like a warning. "Yeah, it's me. Who's this?" The silence stretched for a moment before the voice continued. "This is Detective Harris. We need to talk." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His breath caught in his throat, and the world around him seemed to spin. He had been out of the system for months, maybe even longer, but the past was never really gone. It never fully left you, no matter how far you ran. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, though deep down he knew exactly what this was about. There were things he had done that no amount of time could erase. "Listen, we've been following up on some old cases. There's a matter we need to discuss regarding your parole. We'll be expecting you at the station tomorrow. It's important." The words echoed in his mind as he hung up the phone, the reality of the situation sinking in like a stone in his chest. He felt the familiar tightness in his throat, the one that had never quite disappeared. He was scared of losing everything again, scared that his second chance wasn't meant to be. Bella, sensing his unease, padded over to him, nuzzling his leg. He bent down, his hands gripping her fur as if she were the only thing that anchored him in that moment. "What am I supposed to do now?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Bella, as always, didn't answer with words, but with the quiet reassurance that she had always given him. The soft pressure of her head against his chest, the steady rhythm of her breathing. She would stand by him, no matter what. But the man knew that this time it wasn't just about the dog. It was about him, about the man he had fought to become. He couldn't let the past destroy him again. As the night stretched on, he stood by the window, looking out at the distant city lights, unsure of what the future held. But for the first time in a long while, he wasn't running anymore. He was facing it head-on, with Bella by his side. And that, he realized, was enough. The morning sun was barely peeking through curtains when John awoke. His mind was already racing, thoughts swirling like a storm. He hadn't slept much. His body too restless, his mind too tangled with what lay ahead. The phone call from Detective Harris had haunted him through the night, and now, as he stood in front of the mirror, he couldn't ignore the anxiety creeping up his spine. Bella was sitting at the foot of the bed, her head tilted slightly as if she, too, could feel the tension in the air. She had been his anchor through every storm, but today, even her calming presence couldn't quell the flood of emotions flooding his chest. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. He had promised Bella that he would fight, that they would build a life together, no matter the obstacles. But now, the weight of his past felt like a boulder on his shoulders, pressing down, threatening to crush him. John leaned down, his hands shaking as he scratched behind Bella's ears. "Whatever happens today, Bella, we're in this together." Bella wagged her tail, her eyes filled with unconditional trust. There was no fear in her gaze, no doubt. She was simply here, by his side, as she always had been. Her loyalty, her love, it all gave him the strength to move forward. The drive to the police station was a blur of grey streets and fleeting thoughts. John kept his hands firmly on the steering wheel, his knuckles white from the grip. The air outside was damp, the sky heavy with clouds that seemed to echo the weight in his chest. He could feel the eyes of the world on him, even though he knew no one was watching. Every step he took felt like it was carrying him deeper into his past. And yet, Bella's presence next to him was the one thing that tethered him to the present. As he parked in front of the station, a sinking feeling in his stomach tightened. He stepped out of the car, his legs feeling unsteady, but Bella was there, leading him forward, her fur brushing against his leg as if she could sense the storm inside him. They entered the station together, the cold air inside feeling sharper, more sterile. The walls were lined with the heavy weight of history, broken lives, broken promises. But John had already decided. He wasn't the same man who had walked into the prison years ago. He wasn't that lost soul anymore. The truth, the choice, it all rested in his hands now. Detective Harris was waiting for him, standing behind a desk piled high with files, his expression unreadable. But when he saw Bella, standing at John's side with the quiet dignity she always carried, something flickered in his eyes. He motioned for John to sit. "Do you know why you're here?" The detective asked, his voice low but firm. John swallowed, his throat dry, his heart hammering. "I think I do," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor inside. "You're here because of my past?" Detective Harris nodded, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk. "Yes, but it's more complicated than that. You see, your case, it's come up again. We've reviewed your time, your actions, and something about your situation doesn't sit right with us." John's brow furrowed, his mind racing. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice tightening. "It's about your parole, John. The details of your case have been examined, and there's been new evidence. But more than that, your time here, your rehabilitation. We've seen it. The man you are now, and Bella, she's a part of that story. We need to understand the whole picture." John's heart skipped. It wasn't just about his crime anymore. It was about who he had become, about what he had built with Bella. It was about redemption, and not just for himself, but for everything he had ever cared about. "You're saying you want to reconsider my parole?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The detective nodded slowly. "We need to look at everything. The man you were and the man you are now. And we need to know if this—" He glanced down at Bella, who was now sitting patiently beside John, her head tilted in that familiar way. "This is the change that can last." John didn't know how to respond. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew this was his moment. This was the choice he had to make. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. Not from the detective, and not from anyone else. But he was asking for a chance. A chance to prove that he could build a life worth living. A life that didn't just belong to him, but to Bella, too. He looked down at her, the soft glow of her fur in the harsh, artificial light of the room. Bella was more than just a dog. She had been his saving grace, his constant. And now, together, they stood on the precipice of something that could change everything. "I've paid for my past," John said, his voice firm, the tremble gone. But I'm not the same man who walked into that prison. I've worked every day to be better. Not for anyone else, but for her." He motioned to Bella, and for a moment, the detective simply watched them. The weight of John's words seemed to hang in the air between them, thick with the possibility of something more. The detective sighed, his gaze lingering on the dog at John's feet before he looked back at John. "I believe you, John. But you'll have to prove it. Not just to us, but to yourself and to her." The room fell silent, save for the steady rhythm of Bella's breathing and the distant hum of the city outside. John felt his heart slow, the weight on his shoulders lifting ever so slightly. This was not the end of his story. It was just the beginning. As he left the station, Bella by his side, the future suddenly felt open before him. The road ahead was uncertain, but it no longer mattered. He wasn't walking it alone. The days that followed were a mix of tension and hope. John had his hearing scheduled, but there was no guarantee that things would go his way. Still, with each passing moment, he grew stronger. Bella stayed close, her presence a constant reminder that the life they had fought for was worth every ounce of effort. When the day finally arrived for his hearing, John felt calm. Not because he knew the outcome, but because he knew that no matter what, he had done everything he could. The truth was, this was more than a legal battle. It was a personal one, a test of character, of growth, and of love. As he stood before the board, he thought about his past, the things he had done, and how far he had come. He thought about Bella, who had never judged him, but had always shown him love. The decision came down swiftly, and when it was over, John stood outside the courthouse, the weight of the past finally lifting. He looked down at Bella, who wagged her tail happily, her eyes full of life, as if to say, "We did it." Together, they walked into the unknown, with nothing but hope and the promise that no matter what came next, they would face it together. The sun dipped low behind the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold as John and Bella made their way through the streets. It was a new kind of silence between them, not the cold, empty silence of the past, but the quiet of two souls who had learned to live again, side by side. John had no illusions about the future. The road ahead was unmarked, full of uncertainties, but he knew one thing for sure. He would never face it alone, not with Bella by his side. They moved into a modest apartment in the city, a place where the sounds of passing cars and the distant hum of the street became their new reality. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Every morning, John would take Bella for walks through the neighborhood, both of them learning to navigate this new life. Bella, her fur shiny and thick again, ran freely, her joy infectious as she bounded across the park. Her energy, once dulled by the confinement of her past, had returned in full force. And in her, John found the strength to face the days ahead. But despite the quiet joy of their new routine, there were moments when doubt crept in. In the stillness of the night, John's mind would wander back to his past, to the life he had left behind. The faces of the people he had wronged, the weight of his mistakes, haunted him in the quiet moments. The thought of the future, of truly earning his place in the world again, would keep him up late at night, staring at the ceiling, his mind spinning. But then, as if sensing his turmoil, Bella would nudge him, resting her head on his lap, grounding him in the present. She didn't need to say anything. Her presence alone was enough to remind him that they had already come so far. The following weeks brought small victories. John found steady work as a mechanic, and though it wasn't glamorous, it was honest. He'd spent his life running from consequences, but now, with Bella at his side, he was learning to face them head-on. The work wasn't easy, but it felt good. He was building something, one day at a time, piece by piece. And every day Bella was there, her wagging tail a constant reminder that he was not alone. Together, they had built a new life, forged from the remnants of a past both painful and profound. Months passed, and John began to settle into his new life. He still had a long way to go, but with each passing day, he felt the weight of the world ease just a little. The doubts, the fears, they hadn't disappeared entirely, but they no longer defined him. He was no longer defined by his past. But just when John thought they had found peace, the past came knocking in the most unexpected way. A letter arrived one morning, its official seal a stark reminder of what he had tried so hard to escape. It was from the parole board, the same board that had granted him a second chance. John felt his heart race as he read the words on the paper. There had been a formal investigation into his parole. Something had triggered a review, and now he was being called in for questioning. The words swam before his eyes, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. The fear, the panic, it was all too familiar. He looked at Bella, who sat at his feet, her head resting on his lap as if offering some silent comfort. In that moment, he knew there was no going back. This was it. The moment that would determine whether or not he had truly earned his place in this new world. He couldn't hide anymore. He couldn't run. All he could do was face the music, and hope that the man he had become was enough to carry him through. The day of the hearing, John stood before the board once again. But this time it was different. He wasn't the broken man who had walked in those doors years ago. He wasn't even the man who had sat before them in a cage, awaiting a death sentence. No, this man was changed. He had earned his place in the world, step by step, with every drop of sweat and every moment of humility. He looked across the room, meeting the eyes of the board members, his heart steady, his hands calm. He had nothing left to hide, nothing left to lose, only the truth. "I've worked every day to be better," he said, his voice clear and unwavering. "I've made mistakes. I've paid for them. But this life, the one I have now, I've earned it. Not because I deserve it, but because I've fought for it. And I'm asking you, give me the chance to prove that I can continue to be the man I am now." The silence that followed was heavy. The room felt suffocating. But Bella's presence at his side, lying quietly beneath the table, kept him grounded. He didn't look at the faces around him, didn't search for signs of approval. He simply waited, his gaze fixed on the table, his thoughts only on Bella, on the life they had built. Finally, one of the board members spoke. "Your record is clean. Your conduct since your release has been exemplary. You've shown remorse, yes, but more importantly, you've shown change. And that, John Doe, is what we need to see. It's what we need to believe." John felt the weight lift from his chest, but the relief was tempered by the uncertainty still lingering in the air. But when the board's decision was announced, the words were clearer than anything he had ever heard before. "You're free to go. No more reviews. You've earned your second chance." Tears welled in John's eyes, but this time they were different. These were tears of gratitude, of relief. He had done it. He had finally done it. And as he stepped out of that room, Bella by his side, the future no longer felt like a burden. It was a canvas, and they were free to paint it however they chose. The first morning of their new life together was a quiet one. John woke to the smell of fresh coffee and the soft warmth of sunlight streaming through the window. Bella lay curled up on the couch, her chest rising and falling with each deep breath. The world outside was bustling, but inside it was peaceful, almost perfect. John sat at the table, looking at Bella, and for the first time, he truly allowed himself to smile. It wasn't a smile born of hope or desperation. It was a smile born of peace, of acceptance. There were still days ahead, still challenges to face, but in this moment they had everything they needed. Together, they were unstoppable. The man who had once stood in the shadow of his past now walked proudly into the light. And with Bella beside him, the world felt wide open. A place where redemption wasn't just possible, it was already theirs. And so, as the years passed, John and Bella continued to build their life, brick by brick, filled with the love and loyalty that only they understood. It wasn't always easy. There were days of struggle, of doubt, but through it all, they had each other. In the end, it wasn't the world that had changed them. It was their unwavering bond, their love, their promise to never let go. And that, more than anything else, was the greatest redemption of all. As the years passed, John and Bella lived quietly, finding peace in the simplicity of their days. Each morning, they walked side by side, their bond stronger than ever. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer defined him. The love between man and dog had healed wounds, offered redemption, and created a future worth living. Together, they built a life of freedom, never forgetting the struggles that brought them here. And as they watched the sun set together, John knew that the truest form of redemption wasn't in escaping the past. It was in embracing the present together.